Hi everyone, welcome back to Bite Marks. Today in our Bite Marks special episode is a very special guest to talk about a very interesting game. Say hello to Kgetja Mamabola.
Hi everyone, my name is Kgetja Mamabola.
Oh, Mamabola, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. And I play a lot of games, and I just happened to play Control and 100% completed. So today I'll be your expert on that.
Yes. Kgetja here is one of the rare gamers that I've met who actually has managed to 100% beat Control, which is quite something because I think Control is a very interesting game. And I love games like this, but before we actually, before we get into all of that, we first need to talk about, what is actually Control? For those of you who don't know, Kgetja, why don't you please introduce that to the audience?
Oh, okay. Well, Control is primarily an action game, a shooter, made by people who make shooters, by Remedy.
Yeah.
And surprisingly enough, it is also a Metroidvania game.
Ooh, yeah, that's very interesting. There are not too many shooters that are Metroidvanias.
Yeah, so there's a lot of backtracking and finding secrets and stuff like that. But that's basically at its core, that's what it is.
For those of you who don't know, Control was made by Remedy Entertainment. And if that name sounds familiar, that's because Remedy were also behind the first two Max Payne installments and Alan Wake, and also Quantum Break. So this is a Finnish studio that has a very strange idea about what a video game should be. And arguably, I think they do an interesting job, probably their best job ever in bringing that to the fore with Control. Control won numerous awards and received, generally speaking, high acclaim. So Kgetja here is the expert. I've seen a lot of Control. I haven't necessarily been able to play it. I don't have a PlayStation 4, just yet. But why don't you walk us through sort of the brief summary? Oh, by the way, spoilers for Control. We will be spoiling a lot of stuff. So if you are gonna play it, go and play it, and then come back and listen to this. But if you don't care, join us for this ride. So, what would you say at its heart, Control? What is Control? Go ahead. What is Control?
Well, I don't have a definite word for it, but it is a game about certain character trying to find a missing family member, and just the issues and trials and tribulations that she goes through to get to find this family member. But it's also enveloped in a whole lot of secrecy, and you're finding out about government shenanigans, and it's all hidden behind I don't know what the genre would be called, but it's horror themes, but paranormal themes as well.
Here's where I kind of jump in a little bit.
Okay.
I would argue that in a lot of ways, Control is a modern version of cosmic horror, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But for the viewers at home, if you are familiar with something like the SCP universe, the SCP Wiki, for example, the Foundation, then the game of Control will be very familiar to you, because you've got a shadowy government organization called the Federal Bureau of Control, the FBC, and they are literally kind of like the Men in Black, only instead of dealing with aliens, they deal with all kinds of weird, spooky, entities and objects. Am I right? Am I on the mark?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's less about aliens and stuff, and more interdimensional, parallel universe type things.
The horror is not so much concrete necessarily. It a lot of the horror elements actually in Control are more abstract. It's not, it's not
No, it's not jump in your face.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's actually ironic that you said it's concrete because the design of a lot of the levels and the whole environment is a lot of concrete. It's a brutal architecture.
Brutal.
So there's a lot of sharp corners and grays and browns and stuff, which is contrasted by like when you fight enemies, and that's like where all the color pops.
It's bright and vibrant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is the protagonist of Control?
It's a character named Jessie Faden. And she's looking for her brother Dylan, who was taken by
the FBC.
Federal Bureau.
Yeah,
when they were kids, because he had a sensitivity towards the objects of power within the world.
What is an object of power?
So within Control, there are altered world events where certain things happen that don't make sense.
Like
regular objects.
Like reality kind of breaks down a little bit.
Yes, within the building, within the FBC building, you see it when you take over control points. The architecture changes, the room becomes bigger, the corners shift, and walls become ceilings and things like that. She experienced that in her hometown, and her brother Dylan had some sort of effect on a certain object of power. It was a projector. So these objects of power are normal items that you'd see in the world, but they hold lots of power. And he came in contact with that projector, somehow changed it, was sensitive to it, and it didn't affect him the way it affected everybody else in the town. So the FBC was like, we're going to use you, so come with us.
They did an X-Man ploy.
Yeah, exactly. And they left Jessie as she is. Jessie, when she came to, she had this voice in her head called Polaris, and it's helping her find her brother.
Okay, all right. So it's a bit. So the game is like mysteries within mysteries. Like number one, like what's going on with the FBC, but number two, like what's the deal with Jessie and her brother? Like where is he? And
that's exactly what happened when I started playing. I was like, I have no idea what's going on here, but let me keep going. Maybe it'll reveal itself, and it does. It does eventually.
Oh, that's good.
Come together.
One of my criticisms of Remedy Entertainment, I've played, their Mad Max games. I've played their Alan Wake game. I haven't played Quantum Break, but it's on my list. Is that they don't really explain a lot. And even when they do, you still are like, what is going on? Someone please tell me what's going on. But you mentioned, the architecture. The headquarters of the FBC is a building, which in the universe is called the Oldest House. It is specifically a brutalist building, inspired, I looked up some of the developer notes. It's inspired by some of the brutalist sort of era, buildings from like, the 50s and so on and so forth. Like this old concrete building that's just like imposing and geometric and very, intimidating. But the interesting thing about it, and something that you brought up, is that the Oldest House is also in itself kind of like a non-reality place, because it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Like something, like the building itself is however, it's a skyscraper, but it's however big. But like according to the logic of the game, it's way bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, which is immediately it should like throw up like red flags, like, oh no, something weird is going on here.
But they don't tell you that immediately. You only experience that once you're inside.
How exactly does Jessie, because I assume like if I were, a victim of some kind of like weird alien crime, I couldn't just go to the FBI and be like, hey guys, you took my brother. How exactly, how is Jessie brought in?
When she goes there, it's open for her. She can just walk in.
Suspicious.
And as she's walking in, we see a scene where the previous director of the FBC commits suicide. He kills himself with the service weapon, which is the weapon you get to use.
Okay.
So as he kills himself, you walk up to his office and you pick up the gun, and then you go into this thing called the astral plane, where the board talks to you, and the board is like, you need to see if you're fit enough to hold the service weapon. That's
the weirdest job interview I've ever heard of.
Hired on the spot.
Your previous boss killed himself, and then you had to like, I don't know, like do some DMT so that you could go to like the job interview.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So it was already open for her when she came in, and then they were like, we see that you have the capabilities. This is the board that talks to you only in the astral plane.
Oh my
and they're
goodness.
like, okay, yeah, you can hold the service weapon. Here you go. And
W-
that becomes
What's so special about the service weapon?
it can only be used by the director,
Mm-hmm.
and it chooses who to. It's like a Harry Potter wand, you know, the wand chooses the wizard.
Oh no! Oh.
But in
I hope there are no
like,
turfs in the game.
No.
Oh, thank
no.
goodness.
Definitely not. I hope not. So there's references in the notes, like the collectibles that you pick up in the game, that this is like an iteration of Thor's hammer, Mjolnir.
Mm-hmm. So it's like only those who are worthy can pick it up.
Yes, that kind of vibe.
Okay, that's interesting. From what I understand, the service weapon is the only weapon that you get in the game.
Yes, it's the only weapon you get. It starts off as a pistol, but it can change forms.
Ooh.
It changes into a rocket launcher.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's
and
awesome.
They have cool names. They have cool names for it. Shotgun's called Shatter. The rocket launcher is called Charge.
Oh, okay.
The sniper is called Pierce. Yeah, so there's no ammo.
There's no ammo.
It
Okay,
charges.
You just shoot. You just just blasting.
You shoot, and then like if you shoot, the ammo capacity, it has to reload itself. Like it's like a cooldown effect,
okay.
like Mass Effect.
Oh yeah, like Mass Effect 1. I was just about to say, like the guns don't have an ammo count; they just have a heat meter.
Yes.
Now something that, of course, like has been on my mind. Like, okay, sure, you're this Jessie lady. She walks into the building. She goes for the interview. She gets to pick up the gun. But like, okay, what is actually going on? Like, why did the previous guy kill himself? And why do they need a new director? And like, what's going on? Like, is there something going on at the FBC that she needs? Like, is this like an X-Files game where you go and explore, or is what happens next, basically?
You find out that the FBC has been invaded by a foreign force called the Hiss.
The Hiss.
Yeah.
Are they snakes?
Yeah. No, they're not. There's no actual physical manifestation of the Hiss.
Interesting.
You don't actually see what a Hiss looks like. You just see a human possessed by Hiss.
Oh, okay. So like the people in the building are possessed by the Hiss. So you're
some of them.
Some of them. Okay. And you gotta and you presumably you've gotta like, you know, kill them. You can't like put them down non-lethally. Yeah. It's too late.
Well, there's a point where you try to, because you have Polaris guiding you.
Mm-hmm.
So she tries to clean the Hiss out of the people, except those people end up like evaporating into nothing.
Ooh.
So some of them it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah.
Others, I don't know what the issue is, but like you can remove Hiss from certain places.
You can, okay. And like the Hiss. Okay, so like this is actually, you know, pretty interesting. So the setup for this game, I think, is super cool. You're a person. You saw something weird when you were a kid. Years later, you go to join. You end up at this building. There's this really interesting, you know, sort of setup. The previous guy is like, "Oh, I'm gonna kill myself. Here, take my gun." Turns out the gun is like a symbol of power, but also it's a really interesting weapon. And now the place that you've just been put in charge of is under attack from like an unknown, like eldritch abomination that no one can see, but it's taking over everyone. And like, oh no, this is bad. You know, like what if it gets out? What if it leaves the oldest house? It would do like unspeakable damage to the rest of the world. So does the rest of the game basically follow the idea that you are going to be containing the Hiss?
Yes.
And you mentioned it was a Metroidvania. Could you please just elaborate? Because I'm trying to understand. Like, okay, well, so you go to like different hubs, or like what's the situation?
So if nobody knows, Metroidvanias has a lot of backtracking. So you get to certain points, you might not have an item or a skill, so you have to go progress through the story or something to get what you need.
Yeah,
to open a certain avenue.
An example would be, say, you don't have a grappling hook, so you can't climb up a wall.
Yes. So in Control, there are specific objects of power that give you powers.
Ooh, okay.
So there is a levitating power. There is a power that gives you a shield. There's a total of 7. I can't remember all of them. But like as the game goes on, you can traverse things better. You can there's a power that lets you dodge, like a quick dash.
Okay, it's like a dodge roll.
No, not a roll. It's like a literal dash.
Oh, it's like a dash. Okay. Yeah. Like a flash step.
Yeah. So there's points where you have to stop those objects of power, and that's when you touch them and you use Polaris and you clean the objects, and then like the power comes to you. That's what I meant when she can do it for some things but not for others.
So what is Polaris? Like
Polaris is like an entity within her mind that talks to her. It's also a thing that we don't see.
So it's like it's in a similar vein to like the hiss.
Yes.
Interesting.
It's like the counter hiss.
Counter hiss, okay.
Except when Polaris speaks on the screen, the way they indicate it is like the screen fractures in a circular motion. You would have to see it to understand, but like if you play Quantum Break, you'll see those fractures that they do in Quantum Break.
Interesting.
It's the same ones that they do when Polaris speaks.
I've heard that this is a game that really like makes use of its ray tracing. I can imagine that with all these like various special effects onto the screen, like fractures and stuff with lighting, I can imagine it's a very pretty game.
It is a pretty game, but it's also very taxing on a console.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, you've beaten this game 100%ed it on the PlayStation. I'm not sure if necessarily like a PlayStation is up for ray tracing.
No. I got issues when like if it was a hectic firefight or something like that, it would stutter. But I'm sure on PC they should have optimized it at this point. It would be okay if you have the right machine.
Video game optimization is a dying art, honestly. But let's circle back before we go down too many tangents. So I mentioned at the beginning that I think Control is an example of cosmic horror. Cosmic horror is sometimes called Eldritch Horror. Are you familiar with that term?
No, the only time I've heard Eldritch is in like Warhammer.
Yeah. Oh man, we are big Warhammer fans on this channel. I've made a number.
Oh, okay, great.
I've made a number of videos about like war games and stuff like that. I actually play the stuff. I've got the minis and everything. But
okay, yes, I remember.
Yeah,
you mentioned.
So Eldritch horror is sometimes, of course, called Lovecraftian horror. Basically, because of H.P. Lovecraft, who was one of the codifiers and founders of the genre. The basic premise of Eldritch horror is, I think, a very good one. Mankind is a tiny island of reason amidst a great sea of insanity. That is the galaxy, right? Like, we're small and insignificant. Like the way you look at an ant, like sometimes if you're, outside and you see some ants, like trying to find some sugar or whatever on the ground, like that's mankind. Right. And the humans that are looking down on us, humans who are, the ants in this metaphor, are like unknowable cosmic entities. These great, like, piles of gibbering, chortling flesh and things with too many tentacles and too many eyes. The core sort of conceit of this kind of cosmic horror is that humanity is, for all of our reason, for all of our logic, we're just a tiny speck in a grander, unknowable scheme that we just can't even, know about. And a lot of the times in cosmic horror, actually, this is a good segue. Lovecraftian stories, cosmic horror stories, are typically, the genre convention is purple prose. Lots of flowery language, lots of like, and then this great thing that I cannot bear to describe, so on and so forth. But these are slow plotting books where the protagonists are like scholars or scientists, and they like slowly but surely piece together some truth about the reality, and then it drives them insane. But by contrast, wow. Control is an action-centric game. Right, you've got powers, yes. You've got the service weapon, you've got Metroidvania style gameplay elements. So you're doing a lot of backtracking, lots of traversal. You've got a gun that transforms into a rocket launcher. So that's a huge contrast to the way that typically Eldritch horror stories are presented. So, my question to you is like, why do you think Control does this? Like, it could have been, fairly easy for Control to be like a spooky Lovecraftian horror kind of game and not give the player any weapons at all. But why do you think they do this?
It might be a way to pull the audience because, like you said, the Lovecraftian stuff is slow, it takes long, and Remedy, even though they're good storytellers, they still like to make games that are action centric. I mean, if we look at their previous stuff from Jump, it is story centric, but you still need to keep a player engaged, and I think that's what I would say their plot or their goal is to always have you engaged through the gameplay, but still questioning what's happening in the story, just to keep that pace going. Because I think if Control was just this game where we're exploring the oldest house and like nothing really happens, and then like you said, Jesse goes insane, people would be like, and then?
Yeah. One of the conventions of a lot of like Lovecraftian games, actually, because a lot of them are like that, is that the screen starts to shake and your character starts to go, ooh, and it's like, come on, man, just like get a grip of yourself for like 2 seconds. And, I think it's, you pose a very interesting sort of question. Like, video games are very interactive. Like, they're an interactive medium. Some people might make an argument that a game that has very little gameplay is not really a game. That's a fight for another day. But like, it is an interesting point that, like, if this was more of a conventional Lovecraft story or, a conventional Lovecraft game, there wouldn't really be all that much to do. But the fact that Control is a combat game, it's an action game, right? It does actually give you a lot to do. And to some extent, maybe that's like required by the medium, because if it wasn't, then I don't think as many people would play it.
Yeah, I also would have had mainstream appeal if it didn't have that action-centric thing. Because, I mean, we all, it's like, activate my monkey brain, let me shoot things. So they put it in, because it's what the game probably needed.
Yeah.
For it to sell, to get all these awards. Also, I mean, it was nominated for action games. So.
Yeah. I agree with you. I've played a lot of these Lovecraftian horror games because I like them. Because I like the Lovecraftian stories. But the problem that I've always found with them is that they really struggle to engage you. If they don't have a compelling, scary story, if they don't have like good atmosphere and stuff like that, they really don't have much of a game. And like something, I like we're going to come back to this, a couple of times through the course of this podcast. But like, does the name of the game, Control, does the fact that you have the ability to kill these enemies, to fight them, does that actually, like, how do you feel about that as like a theme? Does it actually undermine the fact that Control is a horror game, that you can like, you've got skill trees and Metroidvania, and like you can kill the enemies. Like usually in the Lovecraftian horror sense, you can't do anything to the enemies, or the Cthulhu or whatever will just like destroy the world. There's nothing you can do. But in this game, you have control in a sense. You can do something.
Yes, but I think with this game, it's more the process of playing is you gaining control. It's not like as you begin you have all the control. It's more. It starts off feeling like a horror because you don't have the power or the abilities to do the things that are needed. Mm-hmm. And as you play, you start gaining those powers. There's another game I played where it felt like that. It was Prey.
Oh, yeah, I've played Prey.
Where you start off and it feels like a horror. Everything is scary. Like the sounds, the enemies, everything is scary. And then as soon as you learn how to play or like you gain the skills, it's like, oh, now I'm not afraid anymore. So maybe at the beginning it's action horror, and then towards the end it's just pure action. It's just I'm the badass, and you're gonna deal with me now.
Yeah, I think that's a good contrast, because typically in the way that a normal Lovecraftian story goes is that the character gets less and less sort of agency. By the end of the story, usually the guy's like a gibbering wreck who's like, I've seen terrible things. I gotta shoot heroin or something to forget. Yeah. Look, back in Lovecraft's day, everyone was doing drugs. Like, cocaine was everywhere. Like, there was
Sigmund Freud.
Yeah, like, there was laudanum, there was opium, there was morphine. Like, a lot of the times, Lovecraftian stories end with a character, like, either going insane and killing themselves, or, like, just doing a lot of drugs and ending up in like an asylum or whatever.
Oh,
you know.
wow.
But in this game, it's like, okay, well, the longer the game goes on, the more control you have, right?
Yes.
And you know, that is interesting because I think also in a way, like, it contrasts really nicely to Jessie's sort of personal struggle, right? Because you said that her mission in this game isn't really to deal with the hiss, right? That's kind of like the you know, that's like the instrumental thing. But her real objective is to find her brother, right?
Mm-hmm.
And getting more of these powers, getting more of these abilities is how she gets control of her life, you know, because in the beginning you told me that she was, you know, a subject to a weird paranormal experience, but she had no control over it because she was a child. But now that she's a grown-up, now that she's got, you know, these powers and this weapon, now she can actually take control of her life. And maybe that's like the thematic parallel here.
Yes. In fact, at the end of the game, she literally says, "I am Jessie Fade, the director of the Federal Bureau of Control." She says it like, finally, I am the director. I'm going to correct things.
She has the look into the camera moment and just feel like, I'm the captain now.
Yeah. Look at me. That's literally what she says.
Yeah,
that's the end of the thing.
That's very interesting. I think something that also, you know, we have to talk about it is like the oldest house. This is one of the reasons why I think if you are on the fence about playing Control and you have the opportunity to play it, I recommend that you go into it because the setting is very interesting, right? So again, you know, a lot of the traditional Lovecraftian horror stuff, a lot of the way that it worked was, generally speaking, you would have these far off exotic, you know, places, and they would be like full of like strange religions and mystic idols, but all of the racism that is implied here. Like let's you know, lay this on the table. Lovecraft is not a nice person, right? He was not a good man. And he would have these, you know, ideas about, oh yeah, every, like, you know, like the dark corners of the world, like, of, you know, in Asia and Africa and South, like there's all these weird people doing, you know, weird rituals and
weird things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He has these weird ideas, you know, terrible ideas, honestly. But the one of the central themes is that, like, a lot of these places are hidden from the world. They're strange places. Like, to go to a temple, you know, to dedicated to Cthulhu is to go literally into like an alien realm. But by contrast, Control takes place literally in the modern world and literally inside an office building.
Yes, in the middle of New York.
In the middle of New York. So that's like such a huge inversion, right?
Right.
If the hiss weren't there, it would literally just be, you know, a regular, you know, sort of like more office kind of experience in a way. And I think there's like, why do you think they did this? Because they could have made a game like, oh yeah, we're going to like the deepest, you know, part of the ocean or whatever, and we're gonna, you know, but they chose very specifically to set it in a building in one of the biggest cities in the world, in a setting that is very mundane.
Well, I would have to say, from a development point, Remedy don't really do foreign places like that. Alan Wake was at a creek, an American creek. Max Payne's like in a New York type city.
It is kind of funny because they are from Finland.
Yeah, they are from Finland, and they did put that Finnish with double N into the game. There is a little bit of the Finland in the game, in a character.
Oh.
But the thing that also gets me about how you're saying it's mundane and, you know, it's right in the middle of nowhere. Once you get inside, also the characters, the people that work at the FBC, even though this weird stuff is happening to them, they behave like it's really normal. They're like, it's just another day at the job. You know, people are dying. There's this entity we don't know about. The director's dead, and they're just like, hey, we have to fix it. Yeah, let's get to work.
Yeah, it's like it's like, you know, your coworker is like split in two, floating from the ceiling, but then also like there's a photocopy machine that's jammed on like floor 2.
yeah, it's exactly like that. There's one side quest where a team of rangers are like the armed forces of the FBC,
the soldiers,
are trying to stop the hiss. Yeah. And the one guy is injured on the floor, and he's like, "Can you help me? My medic is stuck in another place, and, you know, he's the only one who has like the morphine and the stuff that can help me."
See, like, morphine. Okay.
and you're like, okay, cool, let me help you out. Do that quest. You're in a room full of clocks, and apparently there's like an object of power that's just spitting these clocks, and that's how the whole team got injured. They were just killed
by
and
clocks.
overrun by clocks. Yeah, and then the medic is like, oh my gosh, my whole team's dead. What am I gonna do? And you tell him, no, there's one guy who needs your help. He's still alive. Let's go get him. When we get there, that guy has been taken over by the hiss.
Of course, naturally.
Yeah. But there's a way in the game where like the people wear these vests called hadron suits, I think, and that stops the hiss from getting like possessing them.
Oh, okay. So it's like a barrier.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you say frequency, so you mean the hiss is more of like a sound, not like a goo thing.
I don't know. No, it's not goo. I can definitely tell you that it's not goo.
All right, we can rule out goo.
When the hiss are there, like the room turns red, and you hear like these screeches and stuff. That's why I say it's like a frequency. It's like, you know, when you hear a high frequency, there's like that. So it feels like that whenever you're fighting enemies possessed by the hiss. It feels like they were taken over by something that just creeped in through a brainwave or through their ears or something.
Okay. And, you know, that's really interesting, right? Because a lot of the times with Lovecraft's work, right, and the way that we kind of conceive of Eldritch Horror, I think there is a problem in the sense that I think modern people are just like really desensitized to horrifying things, right? Because, you know, Lovecraft, when he was writing, it was enough to be like, oh, I've seen a thing. I can't bear to describe it because my mortal hands are insufficient. And then people are like, whoa, dude, that's the scariest thing ever. You know? But today, it's like, you know, there are like Cthulhu dating sims. There are.
I did not know that. I need to play one.
Yeah, there are. I think, you know, a curse will be upon this channel, but I think I will put a link to one in the description of this video when it goes out.
Okay.
Just so that people can see it. But yeah, there are, you know, Cthulhu dating sims. I think like people are like, yeah, you know, there are Cthulhu plushies. For us nowadays, I feel like we have become more inured. Like, you know, have you seen Stranger Things?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Gorgon, right? So the Gorgon is a creature in a lot of ways that would fit into many of the Lovecraftian ideas. It's a creature from another dimension. It's not like an alien, but it's a cross-dimensional being, and it has all these terrible powers. So in a Lovecraft story, naturally, you would never see it. It would never really be described concretely. He would use like, you know, like he'd use a word like Stygian, you know, to describe it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if someone saw it, they would go and, you know, he would write, oh, and he saw this terrible beast, and it sent him into a mad flight into the night. And, you know, whereas nowadays it's like, oh yeah, so there's an 11-year-old girl, you know, there's like a teenage girl who's got psychic powers, and she's gonna fight this thing. It's so interesting seeing the degree to which we have evolved as a society to basically just we're desensitized. But like the way that you describe it, you know, it sounds like there is something more to this. Like the fact that the game doesn't really like it sounds like it doesn't really explain what the hiss kind of is. You know, it's
they never actually say the hiss is from this place and their objective is to do this. That never happens. We just find out how they got there and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Why or what for, we don't know.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you know, why would I have to explain why the printer is broken? You know, if the printer is broken, we just gotta we just have to unjam it or whatever. Like it's that kind of mentality, and I really think it's very interesting that so many of the objects of power are like mundane objects. One that I found to be very memorable is the fridge that will kill you if you break eye contact with it.
Yeah, if you don't look at it.
It's very similar to an SCP called SCP-173, which will like it's this statue, and if you blink, it'll move towards you, and if it gets close enough to you, it'll snap your neck if you stop looking at it. So you know, there are lots of connections with SCP, and I'll get to that in a second, but like. The FBC are they? Here's a sort of a question: is their job primarily to stop these things, or do they try to study them?
They tried to study them.
Ooh. So the SCP connection is even that kind of explains why they aren't just all like soldiers and stuff like that. They must be like scientists and other people.
Yes. In fact, the main guy who the main researcher is the guy who voices Alan Wake. His name is Dr. Darling. And you see videos of him throughout the game where he's like, we found this object of power, and he's really fascinated. And he's like, these are new avenues of science that we've never heard of. He's going in with that optimism, but none of that caution. And that clearly leads to the mess that has been created now.
It's really interesting.
When you're playing through the game.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because there's another kind of like connection in a way to a lot of the Lovecraft stuff. So in Lovecraft's day, right, we're talking like the early 20th century. Science, in my opinion, was still very much in its like, take a hit of the blunt. What if aliens were real sort of phase? They were doing awful things. The Victorians were, the Victorian ancestors of Lovecraft were like making everything up. People, in those days were still doing things like phrenology, which is garbage pseudoscience. Phrenology, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is the idea that you can measure someone's intelligence by looking at their skull shape. It is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is incredibly dumb, and it was used, unfortunately, by terrible racists to justify their weird, stupid opinions. Even though by their own standards, many of them would fall under the same standards that they are, projecting onto people of color. But I think the point was that a lot of these scientists, a lot of scientific knowledge was like, we're inventing like the steam engine, and we've got like telegrams and things like that. But on the other hand, people are like, oh yeah, space is full of a magic thing called the ether, and you can like fly a ship through space. If you had like a big enough, rocket or whatever. It's like, yeah. So science is in this weird, like, it's exactly in the way that you described it, actually. It's like, hey, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but a lot of that enthusiasm is, generally speaking, misplaced. Right. Nowadays, we know a lot better with science, but it seems like Control takes this kind of approach where it's like, yeah, even though we have all the science, it still doesn't help us. Us knowing about, quantum mechanics or whatever doesn't stop us from, like, being, falling prey to, like, a giant unknowable entity called the Hiss. It's very interesting that there's kind of this parallel where even though we've got all the science, it's a modern day setting, they've, cars, radios, etc., our science still can't help us. And I think that's very interesting because I think Lovecraft kind of was writing at an era when science was very much still in a lot of its infancy. And people were still unknown. They still, were cursed by ignorance. It's a theme of Lovecraft's work that, like, ignorance is like this blessing because you don't know how terrible the world is. Okay, well, nowadays we have space telescopes where, hypothetically, hopefully not Elon Musk will one day go to Mars. we are.
Gosh, no.
I don't want indentured servitude on Mars. Electric boot. I don't want Red Faction to be a real thing. Because you know that Red Faction would 100% be a thing if Elon Musk was in charge of Mars.
There was actually a video I watched about what would happen if humans landed on Mars, and they were like, what if we send a team of multiracial people and then we get there and then the white guy just uses the N-word on the black dude, and then the black dude's like, but you can't say that, and he's like, who's gonna stop me? The people on Earth.
Yeah, I just feel like we shouldn't be. Maybe this is South Africa's big problem. We have this terrible problem of exporting like sci-fi villains.
Right.
In Titanfall 2, I did a video on this actually on the channel about like how the primary antagonist in Titanfall 2 is an Afrikaans guy. It's an Afrikaans guy from Joburg.
No. I forgot about that. And he's the guy in Apex.
Yeah.
He's the game.
He's the guy in Apex. It's just like, oh my goodness. So we just can't escape this, huh?
Wow.
It's just going to stay with us.
So that's our narrative.
Yeah, it's just going to stay with us hundreds of years into the future. You know, people are like traveling through space, and there's still an Afrikaans guy from Joburg who's like a psycho murderer. You know.
I mean, it's they're in control because our architecture is also a little brutalist. So a lot of the buildings here in SA are
if you've ever gone through, you know, like the downtown Joburg, those buildings are definitely brutalist.
Yes.
Actually, you know,
definitely.
you this is another tangent, but like I could totally see a version of Control just like taking place in like the Department of Home Affairs or something.
Because you'll get lost there.
Yeah, like you enter
you'll definitely lose control.
Yeah, you enter the building and it's like a parallel multi-dimensional space, and like there's just like someone who's just like, sir, the system is down.
We need your help. Here's the service weapon. Please help us get the system back online. And it's like, yeah, I see it.
And all you're there is to like just renew a license. It's like, man, every time.
I think we have a game on our hands.
Yeah, you know, like Remedy should hire us to do the storyboarding on their next game, which is like Control 2 Electric Boogaloo, but it's just in South Africa. But yeah, I wanna get us back on track. So, you know, the fact that the FBC are trying to study, you know, what's going on, you know, with these altered reality, altered world events, right? The AWEs. You know, that's very reminiscent to the SCP Foundation, who are trying to understand, you know, the titular SCPs, you know, these anomalous materials. Not all of them are, you know, objects or creatures. Some of them are events. Some of them are like places. It's a huge parallel. I think in a lot of ways, like SCP is the way that we interpret a lot of, like, or at least it laid the groundwork for the way that we interpret like Eldritch Horror, cosmic horror. And so it's only natural that something like Control would want to mirror it. Because like, I do believe you're totally correct. I don't think they would have been able to sell this game to the scale that they sold it to with a more traditional Lovecraft story. Like, have you heard of The Sinking City?
I think I've heard of this game.
Yeah, The Sinking City is Control, but like I would argue in a lot of ways way worse, because it's also a third-person shooter game, right? You play a detective who's going to like a 1920s, you know, city. And you deal with spooky monsters, but it's a much more traditional Lovecraft story. And at the end, it's like you either go mad or you kill yourself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how the game ends.
Yeah, that's how the game ends. It's like you either jump off a cliff and sacrifice yourself to spare the world from knowing the true horror of Cthulhu or whatever, or you usher in the apocalypse because of some, you know, vaguely explained reason. Like, and, you know, the gunplay is really bad. Like, the enemies are kind of it's not a good game. It arguably, you know, they tried to reinvent the gameplay but still kept the same old sort of storytelling conventions and stuff like that, and it's just not good. Well, it's okay. Like, I know I'm ragging on it, but it's really not as good as Control, because Control, not only does it modernize the gameplay, right, but it also understands why it needs to modernize the gameplay, right?
Right.
Because, you know, no one wants to roll around with this, you know, in like with 1920s guns.
No.
It's not. You want to have an interesting experience. Like, I would argue that in a lot of ways, Control does everything that Sinking City did badly. Control does it, you know, well. Granted, I would probably play a game like Sinking City because I like those kinds of, you know, settings. But like, Sinking City didn't, you know, didn't get like a bunch of game awards, and it didn't sell like, I think Control sold over like 2 million copies, probably more.
Yep.
So yeah, it's super, you know, important, I think, to understand that like you have to adapt to the times, right?
Right.
You can't stay back in the dark ages. You know, preferably.
I mean, you said it yourself. You said it yourself that like as a society we changed and people are less or desensitized to these things. So if you're gonna tell me a story and I'm using an interactive medium, and you're gonna tell me about this outer worldly thing, like the language you said they were using, the Stygian thing that I know nothing about, and I'm playing an interactive game, I'm going to be curious as to what is this thing? How do I get to it? Because that's how our minds go as we play games. So
yeah, you know,
I understand.
People have played Final Fantasy. Like, there's nothing that fundamentally you could put in a Lovecraftian game that isn't more terrifying than something, whatever you think that you can just see, on a like a DeviantArt page or whatever, like
Yeah.
it's
DeviantArt.
yeah, it's like people are desensitized. What makes those Lovecraftian traditional ones scary is atmosphere, right? They have a very specific atmosphere, and they sell you on that atmosphere really, really well. But a lot of games don't do that, and so it's like a tentacle monster is just not that frightening anymore. We're totally inured to it. But again, I want us to circle back. We're getting lost in the mind labyrinth. But this is good. This is what makes bite marks worth listening to. Something that speaking of society changing, like something that is very important, I think, in the way that Control handles itself is, well, basically, Lovecraft was kind of a bigot. Well, not kind of. He was a huge bigot, and his stories have kind of two modes. It's a person of color, almost always a man, who is depicted as like shady and villainous or primitive and barbaric, versus a super well-read, like almost introverted, white dude who's like invariably a scientist or whatever. And then women are kind of mostly absent. If there's a female character in his stories, they're not really characters; they're more like props. Oh, these women and their weak emotions, whatever. Yeah, right. I've read these stories. They're not very good. Please, for all that is holy, don't look up what Lovecraft named his cat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I have to do it. So.
But
I'm going to.
But
okay.
Yeah, Lovecraftian horror was a man's club, right? It was basically a white man's club. But Control.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for that, but yeah.
No one is. Viewers at home, please spare yourself. That's the real unknowable, like, Lovecraftian entity. Knowing what he named his cat. That'll do, like, psychic damage to you.
Yeah.
But, Control breaks this mold. Number one, there are many different characters. I would argue that Control is actually very female-centric. Because, number one, you're a woman, you're Jessie. But there are also many other characters, female characters, who play prominent roles, in the story.
Yes. In fact, my favorite secondary character is the woman, Helen Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
You meet her very early in the game, and she's the military.
She's like the head of the Rangers.
Head. Yes, in the FBC. And then there's this other optimistic researcher. Her name is, I think, Emily Pope. I'm not sure. Yes, it's her, Emily Pope. Darling is the doctor. I just got confused because Darling.
Yeah.
It's a unisex type name. And then there's also another researcher which like delve through the game, a British lady who's like a professor and was hired by the FBC, and she studies like fungi.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I found really interesting, just as a tangent, is that while this whole Hiss invasion is going on, there's an entirely separate invasion by like a fungus species.
Yes, down. It's like in the lower floors of the building, and it's like zombie type enemies that you have to fight in there, and they create like the smell that makes you hungry, and the fungi you turn into those. Yeah, it's
like a Last of Us situation.
Sure. Yes, but I didn't like Last of Us, so.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the whole dad protecting a kid vibe is really, overplayed. One of these days, I'm going to do a video about like a conspiracy theory that like one of the Last of Us multiplayers was actually like the way that we got like PUBG and those kinds of games. There's like some conspiracy lore that we're going to do there, but like circling back.
Ooh, I want to hear that episode.
An episode on the hidden sort of origins of these kinds of battle royale games, I think would be very fun. But anyway, circling back, so like it breaks the mold in a lot of ways. Pardon the pun. And like, how do you feel? Is this representation done well? You mentioned that there was a Finnish character. What are they like? Like, just generally, is the game's representation good, or is it more ham-fisted? Do they have like an Avengers moment where all the female characters are like lining up?
No.
No, they don't.
That doesn't happen. It's just that the head of that Helena, the Helen Marshall lady I mentioned, is a black woman,
Mhm.
so it make that that theme of strong black woman, and I was like, I was a little off about that, but at least she's still a strong character. But there's nothing there that's like stereotypy in terms of the way the females are represented.
Yeah,
The Finnish. Oh, what was
no, I was
that?
just gonna say, like, from what I've seen, it looks like for the most part, they're just well written characters who they made a deliberate choice to make them women. Probably knowing the history of sort of the genre conventions, but they didn't not make them good characters, right? They put the work in.
Yes, yes, they did. No one's like one dimensional.
Yeah.
They have personalities and everything. And the Finnish part is there's a point in the game where you need guidance and you come across a janitor named Ati.
Ati.
And Ati is voiced by a Finnish voice actor, and he does speak Finnish. I don't know what's the official language of Finland. I'm not sure, but he does speak the native language at certain points in the game, and he's like the wise old man that guides you through everything in the game. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's pretty interesting. Obviously, the game takes place in America, but like, I think this is the first time that I can recall a Remedy games having an actual Finnish character in it, and it's kind of interesting.
The developers did say they wanted. They've always wanted to put a Finnish element in their games, and they found out that they found that this was the perfect one to do that.
It's kind of funny. Like, they're a Finnish game development company, but if they made a game more about like Finland, it wouldn't sell nearly as well.
It would not.
Yeah.
It would not. I really don't think so. I mean, maybe they'll make a game of Vikings or Norse gods.
Have you heard of a game called Noita?
Wait. This is that roguelike, the 2D one.
Yes.
With the wizard who uses many elements.
Who uses wands. Yeah.
Yes, you use wands and then like you can create fire.
Yeah, you've got like physics effects and stuff like that,
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, Noita is developed by a Finnish company. And it actually has Finnish mythological like references in it. So like,
okay.
I think that's one of the few games that's like, a very this is like Finnish mythology and stuff like that, which I think is pretty cool. I think Finland has a very interesting sort of mythology and stuff like that. But like, yeah, they're making it, Alan Wake is kind of like an American pastiche. It's these people who aren't American who are making it. Like how the spaghetti westerns were made by Italians.
Yes,
it's that kind of thing. But it's popular in America. I think that's that's really interesting. I do want to. I do want to sort of begin to start putting a bow into this.
Okay.
So because we've gone for an hour, I'm sure we could continue, talking because, maybe it would be a fun idea to do a whole like synopsis of the story, or maybe talk about like a specific. Actually, viewers, please, if you'd like to have, you'd like us to have a Kgetja on the Kgetja. I'm sorry, the pronunciation is.
Kgetja.
If you'd like to have a Kgetja on again, please let us know. I'd love to talk more about Control. But we could do a deep dive, maybe a little bit more. But just to sort of like to round off the episode, because we are almost out of time. I have two questions. One, what is your favorite sequence in the game? I'll tell you which one I found to be very interesting. And two, what do you think about the enemies? Which one was your favorite enemy? But before that, my favorite sequence that I've seen of the game is a flashback sequence or like a time loop where Jessie, instead of being the director, she's like a secretary or a clerk, and she just says like keep over and over like processing papers, filing paperwork, fetching coffee. And I really like that sequence because, like, number one, it takes away all the controls. You don't have this badass, special agent with a gun and stuff like. You're just a secretary, right? And it like takes all the control away from you, like it strips you of it. And I think that's a really good moment in the story, to have the players like have a low before they have to do another high. What about you? What is your favorite sequence in the game?
All right, so my favorite sequence is there's a maze in the game, and like an astral maze. And when you try and go through it first time, you just loop back to the beginning.
Okay.
And then Ati gives you his Walkman with the headphones. And for some strange reason, that does not make the maze you feedback. Like it doesn't distort the path towards the end of the maze. And when you put it on, it is music by a Finnish band. It is a metal band, and they're singing like a song made for Control.
Oh.
And in that sequence, it's the opposite of your favorite sequence where you lose all control. It's total badass. You're just going and shooting everything.
It's like the power-up moment.
It's just like, oh, this man just screaming in your ears, and you're just like, oh yes, now it's time to kill. So
that actually reminds me.
That's my favorite.
There is a moment in one of the Alan Wake games. I think it's the first Alan Wake game. Where you're on for whatever reason, you end up at a stage, and like there's like a rock concert that was gonna happen, but then you like trigger all the fireworks and you're fighting like all the enemies. That's like your badass moment where you're listening to like heavy metal or rock music, and you're just I feel like that's the thing they do, or Remedy. That's like one of their.
If I'd played the game, if I'd played Alan Wake, I would have picked it up immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so that.
What was the second?
The second one was like, which of the enemies do you think stands out to you the most? I know you don't. I know you don't like the mold. Which one do you like the most, maybe? Or what's your favorite enemy?
Favorite. Okay, so there's this type of shielded enemy who throws. Oh, telekinesis is one of the skills you can also get, but he also throws things back at you.
Okay.
And there's like a certain dance on how to defeat him. You have to get rid of the shield by throwing something at him. But when he's open in that moment with no shield, that's also when he's most volatile to throw things back at you. So there's like this cool dance of shoot, dodge, throw that I really, really love with that enemy. I actually forgot the name of the enemy, but there's an actual name. There's an actual name for it. And when you first face them, they are a nightmare because you have no idea what's happening. But as the game goes on, you're like, okay, we can do this. They throw like three of them at you at the same time, and you can stop them.
Yeah. You know, it's a theme, I think. Like if I would make an argument here, like I think one of Control's biggest theme is that you get control. You take control of the situation. You know, like you said it yourself at the end of the game. You're like, I'm the director now. And it in a lot of ways it's the anti-Lovecraft story, because Lovecraft stories are all about losing control. You know, but this game is all about getting it. It's about taking control in an impossible situation, the kind of thing that I don't think Lovecraft would have ever, conceived of as being possible, let alone by a woman, But I think that is a very good sort of cap, control is basically the process of getting control. You start off with no control, but by the end you end up with a lot of it. And I think in a lot of ways it has mirrored how we come to understand as a society, sort of like cosmic horror. Cosmic horror still exists, right? The unknowable nature of like reality is still there. Like we don't know, if there could be, parallel dimensions with like the hiss. But but even though we do not necessarily know, we are way more capable of taking control than we used to be, I think.
Yes.
And I think that's a good place to cap off this conversation.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun.
Me too.
This was a great episode. I hope the viewers at home listen to like it. Kgetja, do you have any things that you would like to shout out?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I do have a Twitch that active. It's twitch.tv/KAYCIF3R.
Sure.
I use that handle for everything: Twitter, Instagram.
I will include a link, or I will include links to all of your stuff in the description of the video.
No
if you guys are interested, check out his stuff. I'm sure it'll be good. He 100% completed Control. That's got to count for something.
Only took me about what did I say? 25 to 30 hours. That's how long it takes. 200%.
Considering that Alan Wake can be beaten in 8 to 10 hours, that's a pretty chunk. That's a pretty hefty chunk of game.
For me, it's rookie numbers because I play 100 games.
Yeah,
and I've 100% those.
You've also played Assassin's Creed.
I've completed that. I recently finished Final Fantasy 15.
Oof, that's a slog.
And I'm doing God Eater 3 now. So
Okay, yeah. So you've got the solid gamer credentials. Okay.
Thanks.
So thank you everyone for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Be safe out there. Wear your masks. Take your vaccines if you can get them. And be safe. Bye, everyone.
Bye.